Okay, Ralph, I have started the webinar. So our webinar participants are now entering the room. Just give it a few seconds before you kick off your remarks.
Okay, I'll do that.
You can see on the bottom there are the number of participants is increasing. We're up to about 20 right now.
Okay. All right, well, hello, my name is Rolf Holt, and I am the chair for the Nami North Texas Peer Leadership Council, in other words, the PLC. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. As Diana Banks, she's the Nami Texas PLC state representative in leading this important discussion. I want to start by thanking Diane and Tracy Green, Vice Chair of our Nami Texas PLC, for their efforts and time in organizing this webinar from the ground up. It has been a pleasure to be a part of it and to be in the planning meetings from the beginning. So without further ado, I think we should get started.
Thank you, Rolf, and a very special thank you to our NAMI Texas family and friends for joining us in our very first of many to come panel discussions surrounding race and mental health. Before we get started, I wanted to give a special thank you to our diverse NAMI Texas Board of Directors for not only allowing us to have this event, but for supporting it. Race and mental health needs to be more than a reactive topic when situations happen that are continuing to happen on a daily basis, especially as the world continues to see the racial trauma and the negative and profound impact that it has had on people of color for decades and continues to have today. So before we dive into this discussion, I want to turn it over to our lovely Vice Chair, Mrs. Tracy Green, so that she can introduce our esteemed panel.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you too, Rolf. I am happy to be here tonight to introduce the following incredible panelists. Forgive me for reading from the script, but it's best if I stick to a script. So tonight we have Dr. Wes Bellamy, Mrs. Vicki Coffey, Mrs. Ann Powell, and Miss Grace Mansfield. Dr. Wes Bellamy is the author of When White Supremacy Knocks, Fight Back: How White People Can Use Their Privilege and How Black People Can Use Their Power. He is a former vice mayor and city councilman in Charlottesville, Virginia, and is currently the political science department chairman at Virginia State University. In addition, he is the national public policy chairman of the 100 Black Men of America. Dr. Bellamy also serves as the national co-chair of the newly developed Our Black Party, a political platform focused on advancing the needs of Black people in America. He is the youngest individual ever elected to the Charlottesville City Council post, and he came into the national spotlight after helping to lead the effort to remove statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson from city parks. Dr. Bellamy is truly one of the global thought leaders of the millennial generation, and we welcome you. Mrs. Vicki Coffey has been with the Hall Foundation of Mental Health since 2007. She's committed more than 30 years to increasing awareness, offering services, and enhancing systems to support individuals, youth, and families living with a mental health condition in Texas. In her role as Director of Programs, Vicki oversees a team that develops and implements grant initiatives to advance mental health, wellness, and recovery in Texas. Her work has supported the mental health youth and families of Houston, as well as faith-based communities throughout all of Texas. Vicki has served as an executive board director and secretary for the National Leadership Council on African American Behavioral Health, and is a founding member and coordinator of the Austin Area African American Behavioral Health Network, a certified licensed professional counselor supervisor and mental health first aid instructor. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Child and Family Development and a Master of Education from Texas State University. Welcome, Ms. Coffey. Ms. Grace Mansfield holds a master's degree in professional counseling from Texas State University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. Grace currently serves as the affiliate and community outreach coordinator for Nami, Texas. Grace has a passion for advocating for mental health issues and supporting others to help heal, address, and educate communities in all things mental health. Grace is constantly seeking ways to grow and expand her own understanding of mental illness and how mental illness impacts each person differently. Welcome, Grace. Ms. Ann Powell volunteers for Nami, Texas of Palestine and makes educational videos for their Facebook page. Ann is currently the designated leader for the startup group she formed in 2019, Nami, Texas of Palestine. She's passionate about mental health, self-expression, and personal growth, a proud hobbyist, and dabbles in novel writing, piano playing, and letter crafting in her spare time. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Appreciate you. And thank you so much to our panel for joining us. We truly appreciate you all so much. Now, as we share on topics through the lens of the Black experience related to mental health, we are definitely going to spark some comments and questions where we will have question and answer period at the end to answer those questions. And some of the answers and some of the questions may be viewed differently by others. But the overall goal of this panel discussion is to let's talk about it now. Even as we host this event on the anniversary of the tragedy of George Floyd's death, so many of us still have a variety of emotions, anger, frustration, knowing that the systemic racism had a lot to do with George Floyd's death. Trauma has so often been associated with strength, which many times translates to silence in the Black community. It goes back to that old saying, which I wish that we would truly get rid of. What happens in this house stays in this house. Black mental health matters. And so often it's suppressed because we are so proud and resilient as a people. And for generations, we have and are expected to survive, conquer, and overcome feelings and emotions as a race.
And just give me one moment and we'll get that video queued up. Sorry for the delay.
It's okay. Thank you, Greg. Greg was reading my mind. I was just about to say.
Today, we're going to talk about labels. Labels are used to describe people and things. As y'all can see, my first label that I wanted to introduce to you is that I'm Black. Yes. But then also, I'm a man. And along with those two labels, when you put them together, you find some unique stressors. As I think about whenever I step outside of the house, I have to think about how I'm gonna talk to someone. I had to think about how I'm dressed. I even had to think about just my interactions with the individuals that I may meet in passing. And I think we can all agree when you're constantly thinking about things like that, it can be very stressful. But in 2006, I gained a new label, bipolar I disorder. As I sat in the psychiatric ward of a hospital during my sophomore year of college. My family escorted me to the hospital after they recognized my first psychotic break. During this time period, I lost about 25 pounds over a matter of 6 weeks. I went through a period where I wouldn't leave my dorm room. And I went through a period where I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. But the deciding factor for them was the 3 distinct voices that I would hear. And those 3 distinct voices got me the specific label of bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features. Now, outside of all of the symptoms that I was experiencing, when I received this label, it came with fear and shame. Because I'm a black man from a rural town in Bertie County, North Carolina. Grew up 3-sport athlete, graduated near the top of my class. Got a scholarship, an academic scholarship, to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I walked on to the football team and the track team there. So long story short, I was a man. And I thought that the man couldn't have this label attached to him. Because once people found out about this label, oh, then comes the label of being crazy. Nobody wants to be called crazy. So I had to keep that label to my chest, close to my chest. Didn't want to tell anybody. Only people that knew was my close family. Lucky for me, I also got treatment during that period, through the initial stages. Started to see a therapist, started to see a psychiatrist, and was taking my medication. I got better. But the ignorance in me told me that I was cured. The ego in me told me that I could thrive without being in treatment. So I stopped. I wanted to get back to being a man. Nobody knew that I was in the hospital. Nobody knew I ever took meds, so I could just jump back into the groove. When I got back into that stage, the symptoms came back. But then my ego was talking to me, oh, you don't need to go back to that. You don't need treatment. For me, started self-medicate with alcohol. I was going through a 5th of tequila every other day, and that went on for years. During this period of trying to ignore this bipolar label, I picked up another label. The label was being a survivor of attempting to die by suicide 3 times. First 2 times, attempted to overdose on pills. Last time I put a gun in my head and pulled the trigger. And it jammed on me. Now, a lot of people think that suicide is something that's selfish or, they really don't understand it. But during this time period, I was just trying to end the pain. But then y'all remember those 3 voices? They were telling me that the world would be better off without me here. That was the lowest point of my life. And after a bunch of tears and a lot of self-reflection, I actually went back to treatment. Got on meds, started to see my therapist again, and I got better this time. But as I got better, I started to look at the world completely different. Started to notice that friends and family were suffering the same way I was. And a lot of times, we weren't talking about it. Even a close friend of mine, I understood that he would smoke all day, every day. Honestly, we were this dysfunctional household. I would drink all day and he would smoke all day. But I wanted him to get the help that I got. And the only way that I was able to do that was for me to share with him the battle that I dealt with for 7 years alone, and actually explained to him my diagnosis, explained to him my attempts at suicide. And his very first response to that was, well, bruh, why you ain't tell me? But I want y'all to think about it. What if your friend comes up to you and say, oh, I've been hearing 3 voices. They telling me I shouldn't be here anymore. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was in the psychiatric ward in a straitjacket. What would you do? Since that time, I picked up a few more labels. But honestly, these labels help me manage the symptoms associated with bipolar disorder. And honestly, y'all may want to pick up these labels as well, because you may benefit from them. Now, I'm not trying to diagnose anybody in here, even though I'm licensed to do so. But we all go through something at some point in life. So I picked up the label of being I would say, gym rat or a yogi, an amateur yogi, because I understand how physical fitness ties directly to my mental health. Also, I picked up the label of being a writer, but mostly in my journal, because this helps me keep track of these racing thoughts that I have going on in my head. Then I picked up the label of being an artist. Now, you won't get any Mona Lisas or anything out of me, but I use coloring books as a form of active meditation. And then one of the final labels that I picked up was I'm a researcher. Not in the sense of being a PhD student, but in the sense of researching myself. I keep track of everything. Who I talk to, how much time did I sleep that night. All of these things help me learn my protective factors, help me learn my stressors, help me learn my triggers. Because I can't change anything unless I know about them. So with all of that, I want to challenge anyone who has the label of any mental health challenge and embrace your other labels. You are more than just that one particular label. And for anybody that doesn't have a diagnosis, I challenge you to understand what that label means to individuals that you love and care about. It's used to be a framework to find ways to support that individual, not to ostracize them. I learned how to embrace the label of being bipolar, but I also learned to embrace every other label that was given to me or I gave to myself. I'm not a person that suffers from bipolar disorder. My name is Rashawn Miller. I live with, and with the help of healthy supports, I thrive with bipolar disorder. Thank you.
Mr. Miller's life experience with bipolar disorder mirrors the lives of so many Blacks. Mental health conditions occur in Black Americans in our nations about the same or less than they occur in white Americans in our nation. According to the Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health, Black adults in the United States are more likely than white adults to report persistent symptoms of emotional distress, such as sadness, hopelessness, and feeling like everything is an effort. Black adults living below the poverty line are more than twice as likely to report serious psychological distress, than those with more financial security. Despite the needs, only 1 in 3 Black adults who need mental health care actually receive it. Even when we look at the Flint water crisis in Flint, Michigan, the Charlottesville, Virginia protests back in 2017 that resulted in a day of rage, hate, violence, and death, and the tragedy that occurred at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. in January of this year. These and other catastrophic events impact the mental health of Black Americans. So my first question to the panelists, and I'm hoping that Dr. Wes Bellamy can hear us now so that he can chime in as well. But my very first question to the panelists is, what happens at the intersection of mental health and at one's experience as a Black person in the community? And I want to pose that question to, of course, Ms. Vicky Coffey and Dr. Wes Bellamy, and then we'll follow up.
So I believe that the first thing that happens, can you guys hear me?
We hear you fine, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe the first thing that happens is that we suffer in silence. The intersection and the way that it comes together in terms of us seeking help generally is that we don't. Oftentimes we just have this feeling that I can get through this by myself. And I think you mentioned earlier, Diane, about how we have this mantra, what happens in our house stays in our house. And so you also mentioned that we are proud and we're resilient, and we've had to depend on our strength, our own strength, to try and get through adversity. And so the way that we address it, or the way that mental health and our experience as members of the Black community connect, is that we suffer in silence. We also fall victim to stigma, which is basically just shame. And it tears us apart. I think that, again, we don't get the need that we help. We tend to carry the burden longer. And the longer we carry it, keeps us away from getting the support that's available that we need. And so when we do come to the attention of mental health professionals or someone that might be able to assist us, our symptoms are a lot worse and our treatment takes a lot longer because we're hurting a lot more. So that would be the first thing how I'd respond first.
Thank you, Vicky. I absolutely appreciate that response. Dr. Bellamy, can you hear us now? Do you want to chime in?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
For some reason, my video can't come on, but in any event, it's okay. And I apologize, everyone, for my technical difficulties. I'm traveling, so it's a little trouble, but we're going to make it work. Can you, just for the sake of the conversation, can you repeat the question for me, please? I'm sorry.
Yes, no, it's okay. My question was, in the Black community, what happens at the intersection of mental health and then one's experience as being Black in a community when it comes to receiving mental health?
It's a great question. I'm actually of the persuasion that in today's society, kind of with just maybe based off of my own personal experiences or experiences with individuals who I've come to know, the stigma revolving around mental health is not as strong as it once was. There is a lot more openness in regards to individuals going out and speaking about their experiences and revolving around seeking mental health therapy. There's a lot more acceptance. There's a lot more conversation around why it is important. You see a great deal of these images being shared on social media, specifically Instagram, about how important therapy is. You see a lot of celebrities and the like speaking at length, encouraging individuals to make sure they seek and take care of their mental health and do a lot of self-care. So I think we're changing the tide, and specifically as it pertains to Black folk, it's just not as taboo, if you will, as it once was. Now, that doesn't mean that we still don't have a long way to go, because I firmly believe that we do. However, to that point, I believe that we're moving in the right direction. And specifically for the trauma that Black folks have been through, we've had to endure, and even as has been passed down, as Dr. Joyce talks about with the PT, post-traumatic slave syndrome. To a certain extent, it's in our genes and our DNA. But as we always persevere through, we will do this. But I think now we have more tools to be able to get through and share those tools.
Thank you, Dr. Bellamy.
Can I speak to that real quick? And I think that's very true. I also think that it has a lot to do with generations and what ages we're talking about. I think, speaking from a younger perspective, that's exactly right. From our younger generation, they just get it a little more. I think they really recognize that mental health is a part of your total health, and that you can't address health at all with leaving your mental health out. You just can't focus on the physical. I think folks that are older, and by that I mean, 40s, 50s and above, that we tend to come from that old school lens still, that we are resilient and we can do this by ourselves. And I really do find hope in our younger generations and being so forthcoming about mental health and the importance of taking care of your mental health as much as you do your physical health. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so while the experience of being Black in America does vary tremendously, there are shared cultural factors that play a role in helping define mental health and supporting well-being, resiliency, and healing. And part of this shared cultural experience has to do with family connections, like what both of you just brought up, family connections, values, expressions through spirituality, music, reliance on community, and religious networks. And all of these factors are enriching and can be great sources of strength and support for the Black community. So, and I open this to all the panel members if you want to chime in, okay? What do you see as and since you're already on the screen, Vicki, we're just gonna go ahead and start with you, ma'am. But what do you see as the major barriers for Blacks in getting adequate mental health care?
That's a great question. And let me just start by saying, first of all, and most people know this, but just in case there's one or two that don't recognize or understand, when we say Black people are, and people of color are not a monolith, meaning you can't put all of us in a box and label this as the Black people box, because we're all so different. And we're a variety of people who share a variety of strengths and experiences and challenges that contribute to this world in a variety of ways. And so I think we have to be real careful when we speak specifically about Black people or the Black community, the same way we would with other communities of color. But kind of back to your question, major barriers, I see one of huge barrier is racism. Racism has a huge impact on our mental health. And it's not every once in a while or periodically, but daily, and even sometimes several times a day. And again, I can speak for myself as a Black woman and as a Black person. And I know it's interesting because if you're not a person of color, you're probably saying to yourself, my mental health is challenged daily too, right? And you're right about that. Everyone's mental health is challenged, especially in the current state of our world right now, between the pandemic and the racial unrest. Everybody's mental health is being impacted. And we're hearing that more now as a result and impact of COVID. However, there are additional pressures that are huge, and we have to recognize that. And they make a difference for me as a person of color. And ones you can't begin to understand truly if you haven't walked in my shoes. And so I think racism is a huge barrier and impacts our mental health. Yeah, and I could go on, but I thought I would stop and give our other guests an opportunity.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. And Vicki, I like what you said about making sure that whenever we speak about the Black community, that we're speaking about certain instances or experiences and not to put the Black community in a box. And so I want to preface with whatever I say from my personal experiences that I'm in no way meaning to do that. But I think some of the barriers that I've witnessed firsthand when counseling individuals of color include they're feeling uncomfortable with me being a white therapist. So they're lacking trust with me being a white therapist and wanting a person of color. And then they're being only one other person of color within the clinic that I was in, and that person already having a full caseload. So, and I know that that goes back and is deeply rooted in their history of mistrust with the medical system and then therapy in general. And then as Vicki and Dr. West already acknowledged, but the greater stigma around mental health within the African American community. When COVID-19 first shut down the world and we transitioned from in-person therapy to online therapy, I lost a great deal of the African American clients that I had, and not because they didn't want to continue. We're talking about, you know, Gen Z population here, not because they didn't want to continue seeking therapy services or you know, talking or feeling comfortable with being on camera, but because they were living in multi-generational households where you know, similar to what you guys said, what happens in this house stays in this house, and they didn't want to offend their grandparents or their parents by speaking about their problems to someone outside of the family. And those are just my firsthand experiences. I know that the barriers for African Americans getting adequate mental health care go much deeper and are much broader than that. But those are the two barriers that I've witnessed firsthand.
Thank you, Grace. Does anybody else want to chime in?
Sure. I wanted to talk about my experiences in the medical field. I don't work like as a nurse or anything, I'm just receptionist, but something that I've noticed a lot of the time is, well, just a lot of the time, because of the way that the trickle down effect works with white people, is that we hold like, I don't want to I'm making a generalization. It's not true for everyone, but a lot of white people hold most of the money, and insurance is expensive. That's like a physical barrier for getting adequate mental health care. I've noticed like a lot of the time, Black people work the hardest, but they're paid the least. And it's just, it's a systemic issue of Black people just being put through the ringer and not being paid enough and can't afford insurance because insurance prices go up every year. The Medicare deductible has been going up every year for even retired Black people to get proper mental health care. And it's difficult to get any financial help with this kind of stuff. There is some affordable online, but again, there's, like she said, like you don't want to do online because then everyone in the household can hear your struggles. And if you don't feel like sharing that with other people, that can be a real struggle. So that's just what I wanted to put my little 2 cents in.
Thank you. And that was more than 2 cents, but we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Well, we'll go ahead and move on a little bit, but both all three of you already just went into our next segment actually, and you kind of answered part of this next question that I'm about to come down to, because you know, another part of this shared experience, like Vicki said, is facing racism, discrimination, and inequity that can significantly affect a person's mental health. Being treated or perceived as less than because of the color of your skin can be stressful and even traumatizing. Additionally, members of the Black community face structural challenges accessing the care and treatment that they need, such as Ann said. According to the American Psychiatric Association's Mental Health Facts for African Americans Guide, they are also less likely to receive guideline consistent care. They lack peer health and mental professionals, less frequently included in research, and more likely to use the emergency room or primary care rather than having a mental health specialist. So the next question, which some of you already answered, is, and you can chime in on any of these, how do the following affect mental health care among Blacks, such as racism, lack of trust, like Grace touched on, lack of trust of the white race, poverty, suspiciousness of white doctors, and greater stigma in their own community about mental health, lack of information, and incarceration and trauma. So if anybody want to chime in and touch base on those, any of those?
I think they all, from my personal vantage point, they all play a role. And for different individuals, the barrier may be greater than the other. I think the acceptance, again, and I appreciate my colleague who spoke on this earlier, it may be a generational thing. The acceptance piece may not be as taboo for younger generations. However, specifically when you look at the cost and the lack of insurance or the lack of finding a therapist in which you identify with, may be one of the issues, one of the larger issues. And I'm really in favor of some of the models in which we've seen as of late. There's been different studies and whatnot that, or excuse me, different examples and whatnot have come forth with individuals training barbers and beauticians to serve as therapists to a certain extent. Because I know as a Black man, you know, your barber is your therapist. Your barber is the individual who you speak about a lot of these things with, and them having certain amount of training to be able to discuss and help individuals cope with what's going on or refer them to different is extremely, that's kind of some perspective on it.
Thank you, Dr. West. Appreciate that. Appreciate that so much. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to add on to, oh, sorry, Vicki, I saw you just kind of come on camera. Yeah, just Dr. West touched on something that I looked into today. I Googled just, did a little experiment, and I went on to Psychology Today, which is where you can go and find a therapist. And I Googled, a bunch of different area codes that I remembered by heart, or zip codes that I remembered by heart, just to see the variety in mental health therapists that were offered in those areas. And Dallas, Austin, Texas, Bastrop, a bunch of different places around Texas. And for many of the locations that I was looking at, I had to go to the second or third page before I even found an African-American therapist. And so the lack of the ability to find someone that looks like you, and then on top of that, just because this person looks like you, this therapist looks like you, doesn't mean that they're going to specialize in the areas that you're seeking treatment for. So the inability or the difficulty in finding someone that's a good fit, I think is a huge barrier and affects the access to care that people in the Black community can find.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, Vicki.
I would add to that the lack of trust in the white race, honestly, because as I was trained, and I think Grace and I had a discussion about earlier this week, and that was that we were trained with the background that white people's norms and values and the experiences that we were trained on are based on the white people's norms and values and beliefs. And so that can, of course, influence the competency of the therapists that people go and see. And as Grace mentioned, there is a shortage of clinicians in general. But when you start looking at clinicians of color, there's an even greater shortage. And so the lack of diversity in providers and in healthcare in general, oftentimes having to seek help from a system from people that don't look like us, or counselors that say, well, I don't see color. That's not a compliment that someone says they don't see color, that we're all the same. They're going to treat us the way they treat everyone else, because we're not the same. And I think by doing that, clinicians have a tendency to overlook the richness that we bring and overlook the strengths that we bring, and may tend to focus on the deficits because we don't measure up to what their expectations of what good health and what good mental health looks like. I think kind of hitting on the topic of the topic of poverty, people of color in Texas are more likely to be uninsured than white Texans. And so that's going to limit our access to mental health services. And that's a real big deal, because costs associated with seeking help can be a real barrier for getting help. Even if you have insurance, having high copays, if my copay is $100 and I want to see someone every week, that's $400 a month. And so just knowing that copays are high, and if I have to pay those out-of-pocket costs and prioritize between getting counseling and becoming well mentally, or getting groceries, or paying for my childcare, right, that's going to be a barrier for me. And then also looking at the times that therapy is available, when it's offered. If it's 8 to 5, clinicians have gotten a lot better about seeing people in the evenings and at weekends. But You know, if you look at traditional mental health services and kind of our local mental health authorities, those services are typically Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And I don't know about you, but if I've ever needed to talk with someone or experienced a crisis or anything like that, it generally is not going to happen when I'm busy during the workday. It's afterwards or on the weekends. And so thinking about some of those things as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's move on. Let's look at some of the other barriers to mental health care, like social economic disparities. Social economic factors can make treatment options less available, just like we previously mentioned. In 2018, 11.5% of Black adults in the United States had no form of health insurance. The Black community, like other communities of color, are more likely to experience exclusion from health, educational, social, and economic resources. These disparities contribute to negative mental health outcomes. One of the ones that we're going to touch base on right now is stigma. Because less than 2% of American Psychological Association members are Black, some may worry that mental health care practitioners, just like Vicki mentioned and Grace mentioned, cannot understand our cultural related experience and are not culturally competent enough to treat their specific issues. The stigma of mental health isn't new to the Black community. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reportedly had severe depression during periods of his life and refused psychiatric treatment. Even when urged to address this challenge and by his staff, he still refused. Unfortunately, that scenario still continues to be common today, with African Americans, Blacks, people of color not seeking mental health care because of stigma. We can all work together to recognize and address this challenge, but in order for this to happen, we must understand where it comes from and why it is so ingrained in the Black culture. For many in the Black community, it can be incredibly challenging to discuss this topic of mental health due to the concern about how they may be perceived by others. Negative attitudes and belief towards people who live with mental health conditions is pervasive within the United States and can be particularly strong within the Black community. One study showed that 63% of Black people believe that a mental health condition is a sign of personal weakness. As a result, people may experience shame or embarrassment about having a mental health condition and worry that they may be labeled and discriminated against. This fear could prevent people from seeking mental health care when they really need it. When I look at how open and vocal our powerful panelist Ann is as it relates to sharing her story and her role in advocacy for mental health, I often ask the question, why, if mental health knows no boundaries and does not discriminate, why does mental health look so different for white people than it does for Black people? So Ann, I want to push this question to you first, okay? To get your insight on your approach to changing the conversation around mental health. I know that you're very open about your diagnosis and challenges with mental illness in the videos that you create and publish online, as well as spreading awareness about a variety of different mental health conditions. So what I would like to know, Ann, I want you to start off with, what has been your experience as a white female living with a mental health condition, and has it always been easy for you to talk about your mental illness openly with confidence as you do now?
I have to say, I have not always been this outspoken. I've actually, during my childhood, I was very shy. It's when I started watching people on YouTube that I started to think maybe I could do something similar. And I started doing vlogs like from a young age, like late teens to early 20s. And now I do the videos on the Nami page, but that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, was through or not foot in the door, but like how I got experience was through doing blogs that I've since hidden from the internet because, oh, they were so long ago. But I did want to say my experiences with mental health as a white person, I think that it's extremely different from how it would be for anyone else. Not only because anyone else of who are people of color, I mean, or black or people of color. I I feel like with black people, it's so stigmatized because y'all are supposed to be seen as these strong pillars. Like there's a stereotype of strong people, and it's seen as weakness to have a mental illness, even if it's not your fault, even when it's not your fault, I mean. Um, and I believe that with a lot of my experiences, like people are like, oh, why don't you just go see a counselor? Why don't you just do this? This is the copay, like you said, like it's affordable. Um, I have a camera, so I'm able to talk about it. I have family that supports me in my mental health journey. I'm able to talk about that. But when you don't have those pillars of support from people who are supposed to be seen as strong and never have a single fault, like how do you even talk about it? You know what I mean? Like there's no way you can even just bring it up because it's seen as a fault, and it makes you feel like you can't be trusted, um, from this stereotype, this racist stereotype that has come out. But yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we are going to move. I'm gonna move on just a little bit because I don't want to spend too much time in one area because time's going to get away from us quickly. But we're going to move to the cornerstone of the Black community. We're going to talk a little bit about the church. And listening to Dr. West talk, I should have thrown in the barbershop and the beauty shop as well, but we're going to just talk about the church right now. So the church has historically been the cornerstone of the Black community. And for so many people, it's their choice to seek support from clergy rather than seeking a medical diagnosis. The basis of faith plays a pivotal role as not only a place of worship and to congregate, it is also a source of strength. Faith and spirituality are great tools in the recovery process and are very essential part of a treatment plan. However, the church should not be the only place for people whose daily functioning is impaired by mental health symptoms, which is why I'm so grateful that NAMI has faith-based programs such as Bridges to Hope and Bridges of Hope. So what I'd like to know, a question I'd like to address is, does the lack of experience and training, education in the church affect the quality of treatment that clergy offers people? And Vicki, I want to start with you on that one with your experience in faith-based training as it relates to mental health.
Sure. Yes. So I believe absolutely that the lack of experience in training and education can affect the quality of treatment that clergy and faith leaders offer people. And I think just kind of even looking at that statement, when we say the quality of treatment, because most faith leaders, unless they have been very intentional in getting specialized training in the area of mental health, they don't have that skill set in their toolkit. They don't have the background and the experience. They have the compassion and the love, which I think we'll hear a lot of people speak to, but what's missing is the understanding, the true understanding of the impact that mental illness or mental health, when someone's mental health is compromised, how much that it can impact the individual, the family, and their community, including their faith community. I think that sometimes clergy and faith leaders, as well as other congregants and places of worship, can further perpetuate the stigma that people experience. I know a lot of times you'll hear people say there's no hurt like church hurt. And that's because I think when we go to our places of worship, they're considered places of refuge where we feel like we can relax and we're loved and it's non-judgmental. Oftentimes that's not the case. And so I think that sometimes people end up getting blamed for their mental health condition. They get shamed for experiencing an illness. Also, our places of worship, even though we look to them as our pillar and our strength, people can be called out for having demons. You know, you're demon possessed, or you're having some evil spirits, and even worse, that your mental health condition is a consequence of your sin and just a lack of faith, that you're not praying hard enough, or that your prayers are hitting the ceiling. I think that's another one we hear a lot, and we all know that's not the case. So I think that, again, the lack of experience and lack of education that clergy and faith leaders have can really have a negative impact on people's emotional wellness. On the flip side of that, I think it is a great tool because, again, faith is a protective factor. And particularly in the African American community, it can be one of the things that really help us in maintaining our wellness and recovery. And I hope I get the opportunity to talk about the strengths in that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Vicki. Dr. Bellamy, you want to chime in?
Sure. I think we talk about the quote unquote Black church. There are many pastors who will tell you now that they need their own counseling. And while it may not be the traditional form of therapy in which they go and speak to a professional therapist, there are many religious counselors and mentors who play a significant role in terms of helping individuals work through their own trauma, work through their issues. And I think we need to keep in mind and be cognizant of the fact that just because an individual is the pastor of a church doesn't make them exempt from being a human being with their own issues, trials and tribulations and so forth. And in some instances, those issues and their own battles, internal battles in which they're dealing with may seep out into the church. I think, just from my personal opinion, also, there's a reason why God made therapists. And these professionals are here to help us. So we all, by the grace of God, if we have the ability to take advantage of sessions, do so. And it's also our responsibility to help facilitate those who may need a little bit more assistance in terms of having access to help them get to where they need to be. There's no age on counseling. I mean, my 11-year-old daughter, she had counseling last night. I go every other Wednesday. I put it on my social media. 2 of my daughters actually go to counseling. My wife goes to counseling. We have family counseling. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think, again, the more in which we stop putting certain individuals on pedestals, and the more in which we can understand that people are human, no matter what their profession is, no matter what arena they may be in, the better off that we all will be.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. You know what? You brought up something so valid, even though it's not here in the script. Just looking at over the last decade, and especially in the Black church, the amount of clergy, pastors, bishops, that we have lost from completing suicide. So that is thank you for bringing that up. And before I turn it back over to Vicki to mention what she said. And, I know many churches have become diverse as it relates to their congregants, but in your experience, does it look the same for faith-based institutions that have predominantly white congregants from your experience?
Are you meaning like how they treat counseling and things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And just overall, how they treat congregants, addressing mental health care in the church.
Yeah, there's definitely, with our church, we're a very small church, but we're very lucky because my father-in-law is actually the pastor and my husband has bipolar disorder. So we're able to talk about that a lot at church. We're very open and honest about it. We have like a support group for young adults who can talk about it. So it's very open discussion about it. But I think we may be a little bit of a rarity since we're such a small, like, family knit church. But yeah, we are encouraged to be open and honest about what we struggle with and things like that.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Vicki, did you have something to add in about strengths at this point, or did you want me to come back to you?
No, I can go ahead and do that now. I think that one thing that we have to recognize also is that, I think it was Dr. West that mentioned, our faith leaders are just like everyone else. And I always, when talking with our faith communities, share with them that the 1 in 5 people that live with a mental health condition, that does not at the end of that say, except clergy. They're not exempt. I mean, they're just like everyone else. And I also try to make sure that people know, if you're looking at a congregation, regardless of the size, and you take those same numbers, you'd have to recognize how many people in your congregation are living with mental health conditions and are working, trying to use their faith as a tool to help them maintain their wellness and to live a life in recovery. And so there are so many strengths that faith-based communities can bring, because if they recognize their role and the importance of seeing how they can impact people's overall wellness, I think it's so helpful just to know that. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys hear my puppy in the background pitching a fit, but in all transparency, she has been thrown outside now. And so you might hear her barking. So just recognizing that clergy leaders care about the total wellness of their congregants, not just the spiritual wellness. And so it's the emotional wellness, the health, the physical health as well. And so just having the opportunity to contribute and make a difference by offering prayers or sermons, or even hosting support groups at their church. We have had such success with that, and church and faith communities have been so receptive. So I don't want to just say they just are harmful, because our faith communities have been amazing partners, particularly in the African American community, in educating their congregants about mental health.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and we can hear the puppy, but he's okay. She's okay. Okay, we're going to move on to decriminalization and crisis response. Decriminalization and crisis response are vital components in mental health, but somewhere along the way, it is not as prevalent in the Black community. Criminalization of behavioral health condition has to be addressed. Police often play a central role in the lives of people with serious mental health conditions. Today, 7 to 10% of police encounters involve mental illness, and an estimated 2 million people with serious mental illnesses cycle through our nation's jails and prisons every year. And, you know, one of the things that I always say is our correctional systems should not be our largest mental health facilities. And currently they are. According to the latest data available from the National Inmate Survey, more than half of state prisoners and 2/3 of jail inmates meet diagnosable criteria for drug use disorders. Also, 14% of prisoners and 26% of jail inmates meet the threshold for serious psychological distress in the past 30 days, compared with only 5% of the general population. The absence of treatment resources in the community increases the risk for police contact and incarceration. This dynamic creates longer sentences and higher rates of jail recidivism, disproportionately affecting people of color who are more affected by unjust policies such as disproportionate bail or inadequate legal representation. Emerging neuroscience has implied how crimes linked to illegal drug-seeking behaviors are primarily due to substance use disorders or mental illnesses should be decriminalized and treated as public health issues. Instead of identifying use of certain substances, for example, opioids, or behaviors associated with untreated mental health conditions, for example, disturbing the peace, as criminal acts. Yet the evidence of the impact of decriminalization of drug use is limited. So often mental health manifests itself through anger, rage, alcohol, and drug abuse. Programs that Nami supports, such as crisis intervention teams, assisted outpatient treatment, and jail diversion, make a huge difference. However, we still have to do more, because somewhere along the way, the same care isn't given to Blacks as it is to whites. Black mental health matters. However, the social disparities and inequities do not always portray that.
Matters. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is Black mental health and why is it differentiated amongst racial and ethnic lines? Black mental health are the individual and collective experiences that influence the wellness of a community. Trauma is the biggest influencer of Black mental health. We're talking about historical trauma, slavery, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, the Tuskegee experiment, up until present day trauma, when you see somebody that looks like you get killed in their home. Rest in peace, Botham Jean. When you see somebody who's living with mental wellness issues get killed by the police. Rest in peace, Laquan McDonald of Chicago, Illinois. Or when you see somebody that looks like you get killed by somebody that looks like you. Rest in peace, XXX Tentacion. See, when we talk about trauma, trauma is unique to the individual, and I'm no different. There were 3 impactful traumatic situations that I've experienced in my life outside of the genetic predisposition because my grandmother lived with schizophrenia. I hearken back to being in 8th grade, 13 years of age. On the way to school, my mother has a nervous breakdown. She's crying. She's pulling at her clothes and her hair. She's cursing. I felt helpless because I couldn't help her I couldn't help myself. And see, I was expected to continue to go into school that day and achieve. It's funny, when I first started telling this story, I told my mother, listen, I'm telling the story of when you had a nervous breakdown. And she said, Phil, that didn't happen. Now, I know I'm getting older. I have a few grays, right? But I swear I remember that. And then she called me a week later and she said, Phil, I didn't know you remembered that. As if I wouldn't remember the most traumatic situation that I've experienced in my life. And that typically happens. We're often expected to just continue on because we are so resilient as a people, because we do survive, and we've survived for hundreds of years. And I was expected to survive and go into school that day and perform. And I did, because like many of us, I learned how to suppress my emotions and my feelings. But what if I didn't? What if I went into school and I started arguing with peers and fighting? What if I started arguing with the teachers? What if I did criminalistic behaviors within the community? Would I be deemed incorrigible and unable to be in the school setting, in the community setting? Or would anybody care that I just experienced this traumatic situation that has impacted me?
Okay, so on that one right there, why is it, although mental health care treatment should be totally the same, why is it so different, and what can we do to close that gap? That is more addressed to the mental health professionals.
Yeah, well, I want to jump on this question first. I remember a video that we watched in one of my graduate level classes, and it sparked the conversation of discussing how African Americans are portrayed in the media, especially in pop culture. When we think about rappers are traditionally African Americans, and how there is quite a bit of excessive use of drugs in their videos and in their lyrics, and how for so long I just thought of this as that's just their culture, that's their normal way of being, without stopping. It took me to get to graduate school to stop and analyze, well, why is this person suffering? What trauma has this individual endured that makes them feel the need to numb themselves? And I think it comes from, and my misunderstanding of that is that lack of understanding that this person is hurting. It's not a culture to have a substance abuse disorder. It's not a way of life to want to overuse drugs. When I think of the way that African Americans are thought of with their mental illness, I think that they're not thought of having a mental illness. I think of George Floyd begging the officers to believe them whenever he was saying he was claustrophobic, and they were trying to put him in the cop car, and they looked at him as being defiant. I think of Laquan McDonald, running down the street on PCP and no one stopping to question why he felt the need to numb himself. I think of Elijah McClain, begging the cops to understand that he had boundary issues and that they were invading his space, and that was being perceived as him being suspicious or him being defiant. And so I think the way that we view African Americans with mental illness is that we do not view them as having a mental illness. We view them as being defiant, we don't give them the proper care and treatment that they deserve.
Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing that. And Vicki, I know the conversation that myself, you, and Grace had the other day. Do you want to chime in about the, you having to, how you felt in having to, when you first started treating Black males?
I think the conversation really talked about how I was trained, and I mentioned this earlier, I was trained on the norm. We're treating or supporting rather white people. So the values and beliefs of a kind of the white culture, I was trained that same way because the institution that I went to, basically that's, and most institutions when they are, and people are in their different training programs, that's what they're taught. But I do think there is a difference, and there should be a difference in the way that people of color or Black people in this case, and I hate the word treated, because anytime I think of treated, that feels so not authentic, or unauthentic. So I think in terms of the way that mental health support or care looks for people of color, we should be treated differently, because again, we don't fit in that same box, and our needs are different and they're unique based on our experiences and the way that we see the world and the way the world treats us. And so it's a pretty complex situation, because you really, if you think about it, you should think, well, we're just people and we should just care that people feel well and accepted and loved. But there are just so many other things that are wrapped into that I think we again have to make sure, and I'm probably moving on to the solution piece, but that we recognize the strengths and also the challenges and the needs that people of color bring to a counseling session when they show up.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you. And you know what, you kind of took us into the next section, and we kind of discussed it a little bit. But treatment issues. Black people are more often diagnosed with schizophrenia and less often diagnosed with mood disorders compared to white people with the same symptoms, due to the fear of Black people by white professionals. Additionally, they are offered medication or therapy at lower rates than the general population, as in so many occasions, they're seen as not worth saving. Black people are overrepresented in our jails, our prisons, making up 13% of the general United States population, but nearly 40% of the prison population, and that's pitiful. In 2016, the imprisonment rate for Black men was more than 6 times greater than that for white men. The imprisonment rate for Black women was almost double that for white women. Black people with mental health conditions, specifically those involving psychosis, are more likely to be in jail and prison than receiving treatment as other races do. So before we move on, and you guys, I apologize, but because of time's sake, I had to cut some of the questions off, okay? But why is treatment so different among racial and ethnic lines, in your opinion? And then you can chime in as well. And I just wanted to apologize to the audience. I know Dr. Wes Bellamy had a meeting with the governor, so he had to drop off on us, but he did leave his email address if anybody wants to get in contact with him. But back to you, Vic.
I did want to add that in regards to the last question and this question, that I believe there is a disproportionate amount of people in prison due to systemic racism, and the imprisonment of people for abusing drugs or like recreational drugs or hardcore drugs is because white people get away with it and black people don't because of their color of their skin. I also wanted to add on to the comment about finding I guess repeating your question. The reason why there are more people in prison for mental health is probably because of racism for the very same thing. White people are more likely to get treatment. Black people are more likely to get punishment. I've seen that in media. I've seen that in the news. I've seen it over and over again. So that's just my little comment on that. But yeah.
Well, that was a huge comment and we appreciate that. Thank you for your honesty.
I just think that there's a lack of cultural competency. Vicky touched on this, and it's something that we had kind of touched earlier. We both feel like we had great educations, yet there still was, the theories that we learned were made by white men, and they were therefore white men. And so there's a lack of competency there. And I think that we are growing as a profession, but there's still a lack of cultural competency there. I think with the way, and Anne touched on this too, when I think of the way that children, African-American children, are viewed when they're in class. My internship was in a was in a school district. So this is one of the things that I saw firsthand, where an African-American child that had was misbehaving in class was immediately sent out of the classroom, where a white child was thought of, having ADHD and looked at differently and was provided with resources and redirecting. And you don't see that with African-American children in the school district, at least not the one that I was in. I'm not saying that all school districts are like that, but so I think that there's just a different way of approaching African Americans when it comes to their mental health. And I think that it stems from a lack of competency.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Vicky, I see your lips moving. Were you getting ready to chime in?
No, I would just add that I think that a lot of the ways that our trauma manifests itself are in things, unfortunately, that end up being things that can be criminalized. And so I think someone mentioned anger and incarceration, of course, and just abuse through relationship issues and through different types of addiction, all these type of things and behaviors that a mental health condition, the way that it can show up, ends up being things that people can get arrested for or go to jail for. And so on top of having a system that is already built to increase the likelihood that people of color, particularly Black people, are incarcerated, there are things in terms of our behaviors that get criminalized. So it's just basically just reiterating what's already been said.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, thank you, Vicky. We're a little pressed for time, so we're gonna go into our second to the last video, and then we're gonna bring it to a close and open it up to question and answers, okay?
Oh, I think he's on the wrong video. Are we doing the final video?
Yeah, no, not the final one. He's on the right one. We're gonna go to the third and then.
I was always taught to be strong in this world. Told to never let my guard down because at any moment I could be attacked without a moment's notice. That my skin made me a target. Skin that has persevered through many trials and tribulations, from seeing my mama raped by landlords, to my father being beaten and stripped of his manhood, to my brothers and sisters being separated into jobs for this bigger system. My skin has always been under attack. Yet somehow we prevailed through it all, through all the lynchings, literacy tests, new Jim Crows, war on drugs, the gentrifications, police brutalities, food deserts, mass incarcerations. We survived and adapted and pushed to change because our very existence depended on it. Our very existence depends on this Black strength. Strength that has carried us for decades, but is undermining an important aspect of our humanity and feeding in on itself. Being strong all the time took away our ability to speak about our weaknesses, our sadness, our mental illnesses. This silence is killing us. On top of that, we lack proper mental health care access and endure mistreatments by medical professionals who cannot relate to us in their practice. On top of that, we stigmatize mental illness to preserve this place of our strength, damaging ourselves, and among Black children observing a spike in suicide rates because they may feel that their place in heaven is way better than their place here today, because when Black life isn't valued enough for professional help, adequate housing, or even breathing, life here degrades in value in comparison to life after. Black bodies, strong Black souls are floating through the wind, seamlessly letting go. Strong Black bodies are screaming for help, but suffering in silence and being socially and systematically being put on quiet. Black souls are strong, but we do need help when we do fall through the cracks. That is why I want you to know that you can patch things up with me. All right, we can kick it back like it was a drive-through movie in the 1970s. We can get some help from people who actually understand us, refute our standards of stigmatizing mental illness, and fight against the structures that chronically misdiagnose what this really is. Fight against the racism that brings up our mental health issues and lowers our treatment options, bringing us one step closer to seeing no other option. I want us to see that we have a way to heal this wound that has been widening ever since day one with no means of contracting. I want us to know that the seed that we sow today is the harvest we reap tomorrow. And when we finally reap, we can find peace in these moments, noticing that the danger isn't gone, but we finally have a place where it feels like it is, the grounding of Black bodies.
Okay, and I just wanted to share, because I know my phone is blowing up for us to keep going and not shorten, but we really are slow on time, so we're just going to go ahead and close. But like I said in the very beginning, we are going to continue having these discussions quarterly. So this may have been your first, but it won't be your last, okay? So before showing our final video, I wanted to share a very moving response that I was sent to me by a beloved sister based on a conversation that she and I had after I sent this video for her to view. Her quote was sparked by me telling her that my intent in sending her the video was not to make her cry. And here is her compelling reply to me. She said, "I should be crying. America should be crying. Like he said, you talked about the city on fire. Where is your rage when my people die? I'm just so sorry that you and every person of color have to go through this, have to feel this pain. I can't even comprehend it. It's not right and it's not fair." So here's our final video. Thank you, thank you. And I just wanted to share before we open it up to question and answers, that comment actually came from Miss Grace Mansfield. So she was a sister that I was talking about that we had discussed the video with. I want to close with one final question to Vicki. I would like you to close us out with this question. Where do we go from here, as so much in our society today is impacting race and mental health? And then we're going to open it up to question and answers.
You know, you think I would have it figured out by now with the mute button. So first of all, I think we have to ensure that culturally appropriate resources are available. And we also have to think about where we're offering or considering resources and supports for individuals that look like me. For instance, we're talking about supporting people getting counseling and support in non-traditional ways. Well, they're not really non-traditional for us to go to our church or for kids to talk to their coach. And so recognizing that if these are the places where people feel that they get the support that they need, it doesn't have to be a licensed professional. Now, I know there are times it does, But when there are opportunities for us to train and equip our clergy and faith leaders and our ministries at church with mental health tools, it's important that we do that. It's also important that we do that with our coaches and in our barbershops. And we do those and we incorporate mental health supports in all the places where people of color live, where we learn, where we play, all those kind of cliche things we're hearing, coffee shops and places of work and gyms and parks, that we get outside the walls of traditional counseling centers, because really, honestly, a lot of us are not going there because we either don't feel comfortable or we don't feel welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lastly, can I add something else? I also think that behavioral health professionals have to take a look at themselves and what they're bringing into a session. If you're not a person of color, you have to learn and educate yourself about historical and cultural trauma and the impact that the legacies of oppression have on our current day mental health. It's just a few things.
Thank you. Thank you. Grace, we can go ahead and open it up to question and answers.
Yeah, I wanted to let everyone know that I don't think we have enough time for question and answers, but I did record every single question that everyone asked, and that we promise that we will answer them and publish them at a later date soon, hopefully by next week. And we sincerely apologize for not having enough time and running short. This is as you all know, this is our first time having this. And we plan to do it quarterly, so we will plan better next time. But I think that we're gonna have a short message from our executive director, Greg Hanch, and then I think we're gonna close out tonight's video or tonight's webinar.
Hey everyone. Well, this has been an amazing event. And I want to thank everyone who was a part of it, whether you're on the panel, whether you're an organizer, whether you're a participant, you're watching on social media. Conversations like these are step one. This is the beginning of something. And I think the title of this event is a perfect way to initiate a dialogue. So we're talking about it. And it's also the perfect way to initiate a movement. Now let's act about it. Conversation is important. It helps get people on the same page. It brings people together. It facilitates the sharing of ideas. And now we need to hit the ground running and start working on solutions. And I think, in doing so, it's important for us to get outside of our traditional bubble that we work with, the usual suspects. We are all in this together. I truly believe that, but we're not all affected proportionately by these issues that we've been talking about tonight. And there are a broad range of issues, barriers to care, stigma, disparities, outright discrimination and racism. And there are groups of people in our society who bear the brunt of those issues in ways that others among us will never know. Sorry about the cat that just jumped in my lap. It is what it is. We need, that's just an indication that we need to work together for the good of humanity. And, NAMI Texas is very much committed to this work. NAMI Texas is, we have in our strategic plan that we will be working on addressing, and we are working on addressing diversity and equity and inclusion. We want to be held accountable to the objectives that we've articulated in that section of our strategic plan. We want to make sure that our programming and that our advocacy truly reflects our stated commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion. We're not going to achieve any of those goals by working exclusively with our traditional partners in mental health communities. We need to branch out. We need to work with criminal justice advocates. We need to work with education advocates. We need to work with civil rights advocates. And that's how a big part of how I think we're going to get there. Our programming is increasingly reflecting the need to do outreach to diverse communities and to underserved communities. There's the Nami Sharing Hope program, which we are going to be implementing this year. And that's a mental health awareness program for Black Americans. Our advocacy work, increasingly reflects the need to address these issues. And there are some successes. I want to repeat that today is the 1 year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, and the world has forever changed as a result of that tragedy. While I think we're still feeling the emotional impact of that tragedy, and that will never completely go away, we are seeing some positive things result from it, including legislation to address the issues that came up in that incident. Just today, an hour or two ago, on the floor of the Texas House, a bill passed to ban chokeholds among police. A couple of days ago, the Botham-Jean Act passed to fix some of those problems as well that came up in that case. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the level of progress or the speed in progress that needs to be occurring. This is a crisis situation when it comes to disparities, racism, discrimination, etc. One of the bills that we supported and that I know the Hogg Foundation worked on, Vicky's with the Hogg Foundation, was a bill to create an Office of Health Equity, simply to look at disparities, collect that data, and use that data to reduce disparities and inequities in our state. That bill didn't even get a hearing in the Texas Senate. So we have a long way to go, and the only way we're going to achieve the gains that need to be achieved is by working together and acting aggressively to fix these problems. And there are a wide breadth of issues that are out there, and working day by day, incrementally, we will achieve significant progress in addressing the impact of racism on mental health, addressing disparities, addressing disproportionalities. We are making progress, and we will continue to achieve gains by having events like these and then acting as a way of following up. So again, thank you all. This is a really, really special night for NAMI Texas, for the NAMI Texas Peer Leadership Council. Special thanks to Diane for doing so much work behind the scenes to pull this together. Grace worked really hard as well to pull this event off, and several others. So, as we wind down Mental Health Awareness Month, May is Mental Health Month, this is a great way to acknowledge an aspect of mental health that often goes overlooked. And I'm really proud of this. I think this is one of the most special gatherings NAMI Texas has ever had, and I'm just excited to see what it leads to. So thank you all so much for your participation, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.